curious if you could describe for the audience what the deliberate practice and the training and the prep looks like, and how that gives rise to the automaticity and flow.
Flow comes when you're at that, what I call boiling point. Every bit becomes a song. There's a perfect number of words and the perfect emphasis for every sort of idea you want to convey.
Flow science can really comfortably explain like 93% of everything that happens in a flow state. But there's about 7% that feels a little magical, right?
The problem with getting older is getting too relaxed and too complacent and losing your hunger. I think work should be a mindset. Always be writing, always be creative. And you can use everything around you, including fatigue, including anxiety.
Creatives are all very similar. They're people who have found ways to take their emotions and turn them into art, one way or another.
What does it take to do the impossible? What does it take to level up your game like never before? What does it take for individuals, organizations, for even institutions to achieve paradigm shifting? Nothing is ever the same again. Breakthroughs.
Our mission is to decode the neurobiology of flow and cognitive peak performance. Access the minds of maverick scientists, groundbreaking innovators, and world-leading experts to understand what it takes to achieve ultimate human performance, so you can feel your best, perform your best, and accomplish your boldest goals. I'm your host, Rian Doris, and together with best-selling author Stephen Kotler, I present to you Flow Research Collective Radio.
Welcome everyone to Mastering Flow States to Kick Ass Until You Kick the Bucket. I think that's one of my favorite titles of any crowdcast we've done, Stephen. And we have here Stephen Kotler, who you all know. And we're going to be talking about Stephen's new book, GNAR Country, Growing Old and Staying Rad, and diving into peak performance aging. And we are joined by Bryan Callen, who is an actor, a comedian, and a podcaster, best known for his recurring role as Coach Meller on ABC's School and the Goldbergs, and as one of the original cast members of MADtv. Callen has also appeared in TV and films including Kingdom, Hangover 1 and 2, Ride Along, Sex and the City, Old School, Entourage, Californication, and many more. A veteran headliner, Callen performs in theaters and comedy venues across the world. His third comedy special, Complicated Apes, great name as well there, Bryan, topped the iTunes charts upon its release in March 2019, and it can also be found on Amazon Prime for anyone who's interested. And his fourth special, Man Tears, was released earlier this year and can be found on YouTube. So, Bryan, thanks so much for joining us. I also want to mention,
I got to tell you,
I wrote that bio.
Yeah, well, I was going to tell you, you're very impressive on paper.
I don't even know. I'm kidding when I said I wrote that bio, but that is just a long, unnecessary bio. My father was looking at my IMDb and he goes, "You've done some stuff." I was like, "Well,
yeah." I didn't even finish the bio, actually. There's another paragraph. So I'll just quickly mention.
Bored with myself.
Oh, wait. Yeah, let's do this.
Let's get into flow, man. Forget
Okay. No more Bryan bio. So, Bryan, I have a question for you, actually, to kick us off. What we're going to do, by the way, just for everyone listening, we're going to ask Stephen some questions about comedy, which I think he fancies himself as pretty good at. And we're going to ask Bryan some questions about peak performance as well. But I want to start just, Bryan, with a question for you that is more about comedy, because for anyone who's watched you doing your thing, and being on stage, you get into this state where you kind of become the joke with how you move your body and how you use your hands to gesture, where you're totally taking on the character or the scenario you're using to make people laugh. So I'm curious, to kick us off, if you can tell us what you've learned about using movement and gesture to maybe access flow when you're rehearsing your bit, and just how you find you best get into flow in doing comedy in general.
Well, I think it starts with intention, but there might be something behind intention. So if you're writing a joke, I think the jokes that you're the most proud of, because you always say that you're in the business of original self-expression, and that could be as an actor, that could be as a painter, a dancer, whatever it might be, a musician, comic. So I think I think the goal is not to be aware of the movement you are making. I mean, you're gonna accentuate things with your body and do stuff, but I think that the movement should be something that happens because it informs what you're saying with emphasis or with color. But I think once you're aware of it, you're going to come across, and I think the audience, whether they know it or not, what's fascinating is they can smell you manipulating them. So what I try to do is not worry about how I move. I knew that would happen to me. I'm physical, and I can communicate with my body well. And for whatever reason, I do that. But what's more important is that I'm getting to what I really want to say. And it's probably something like trying to answer a question for myself that comes out in a funny way.
That's interesting. Do you notice, Bryan, a big difference in how you feel and the quality of the reception you get when you feel in flow performing versus not? And if so, could you tell the audience actually about any experience you've had where you just could not access flow and maybe even like bombed and
well, flow comes when you're at that what I call boiling point. So every bit becomes a song. Right. So there's a perfect number of words and the perfect emphasis for every bit, every sort of idea you want to convey. And before you get to that stage, you're not in flow. But then what happens is, like right before you're about to hit a special, you're singing. Every song is, you figure it out. It's not row, row, row your boat. It's row, row, row your boat. You get that. So now what you're doing is just going. You're just there to give them an experience. And then when you're in that state of flow, what happens is something beautiful, which is like I'll find myself managing the audience. I can watch one side starts laughing. I was in Sacramento, and I think I've told the story, but one side was laughing so hard. I knew they were going to get tired. The other side was, they were a little tired, because I realized I was favoring this side. And then this side was sort of right in the middle. So I had to take air out of that side and put it into this side. Then there was a guy who wanted to be seen. I could see he was a young man he was so overwhelmed that he wanted to be like whatever was going on the stage, that he was trying to get involved with the show. He didn't know what to do. So I had to acknowledge him. I had to give him a little serum. You got to give him a little, I see you, I got to acknowledge you. I got you. And then keep moving. So what you realize is you're playing the audience almost like an instrument itself, almost like a giant, what's it called? What is this thing? What is that terrible instrument? Accordion. Yeah. Air in, air out, moving that's flow. That's when you realize that you belong nowhere else but there. And that's where you can do an hour and a half on stage and you're not tired, and you can get back on stage and do another hour and a half and you're still not tired. That's kind of, that's, I guess, when you are getting close or very close to what you have imagined in your mind's eye.
That's interesting. What characteristics within an audience have you found make your experience most conducive to flow? And are there differences based on geography?
I never worry about the audience. If I'm worrying about the audience, I'm out of flow. I don't wait for the audience. I tell the audience how it's going to go. This is how it goes.
So you're almost training them on what to expect. You're almost training them and kind of setting the frame for their experience.
That's right. Art's domination in that sense. Here we go. This is how it goes. This is my expression. And that's probably why, when you talk to great violinists or pianists, that's why practice is a religion. If you're not practicing every day, you're going to get out of flow. You cannot be thinking, man. And boxing, anytime you're good at something, you have to get, like boxers always say, I think it was Andre Ward's coach said, you got to be so good at everything you do that you can't, when you get hurt, you still can't do it wrong. Most people get hurt and they do this. When you're a boxer, when you get hurt, you automatically make yourself smaller, and you're still keeping your eyes open. You can train your brain to do that even when you're getting hit in the face. That's crazy. But you will never do that unless you do it over and over and over again. That's why you see those guys in the mirror and they're always boxing. They're religious about training. Floyd Mayweather was religious about it because he couldn't miss a stat. One mistake, 1 day, 2 days taken off, once you think you've arrived, good luck, dude. Good luck, because it's coming, and it's coming fast. And that's
there's an interesting kind of peak performance question between deliberate practice, which Anders Ericsson used to talk a lot about, and flow. And so I'm curious if you could describe for the audience, what the deliberate practice and the training and the prep looks like for you for a special or a set beforehand, and how that gives rise to the automaticity and flow that you're describing there.
Well, part of it's daily attendance, but the other side of it is mindset. I think that writing, I think one should take all the fencing away from the idea of a workspace. I think work should be, at least depending on the kind of work, but I think work should be a mindset. Always be writing, always be creating. And you can use everything around you, including fatigue, including anxiety. I want it all. Give it to me all. I want every bit of it. I want to sit back and witness it and use it. In fact, I often wonder if I would have been anything like a comic if I hadn't had such a chaotic upbringing. Harriet Dorr won the National Book Award. She was 85 years old. Before that, she was a housewife for 35 years. And somebody said, were you happy being a housewife for 35 years? And she said, can you repeat the question? And the person said, were you happy being a housewife for 35 years? And she said, I've never heard of anybody being happy for 35 years. And why would anybody who was happy ever write a book? And I just stand up and all that. So I'll use it all. Don't worry, use it all.
That's great. No, I love that. I love that. Stephen, it reminds me a little bit as well just of how you prep for speeches, using the fatigue, walking while you do it. I know you've talked about that a little bit, but it might be interesting for the audience to hear about, how you prep for, what is essentially the kind of performance you do, Stephen, when you are giving, speeches to huge audiences and things like that as well.
I will answer that question in half a second. I got to ask Bryan a question first, because I always say that I have any sort of career because very early on, I figured out how to turn pain into words. I got right later, it became a lot of other emotions, but literally like in the period between grad school, I had sort of like this mess, or college and grad school, I had this mess that was like the first version of my first book that was terrible and needed to be thrown out and rewritten. And Nadia broke my heart. And I remember I was so clearly sitting in my room and I was like, I'm dying. There's nothing I can do. Nothing, everything's going to suck. Maybe I can take this and put it into that. And
yeah, right, I saw it. Yeah.
I think it's the first move towards actual creative artistic success, is because then you no longer get derailed by life, which derails so many creatives. The emotions derail so many creatives, and you can just turn it into art. And I think that's a very—
The minute I put eyes on you, the minute I met you, I swear to God, I knew everything about you. There's a look to somebody. It's like a junkyard dog where you can see the ribs on that fucker. You know what I mean?
What's the look, Bryan? What were the tells?
It's a drawn, hungry, dissatisfied look. There's a frequency to the movement of his fingers, and just the tightness of the body. It's a fascinating thing, and always kind of when a deer's drinking at a watering hole and always looking for is it still safe? It's fantastic. It's fantastic. So I recognize myself when I see it. So I got Stephen right away. I really did.
By the way, it's a segue into the answer to Rian's question, which is because I am those things that Bryan just described. If I'm going to be on stage, right, I will just practice the speech in conditions of exhaustion. Right, I'll work all day. I'll go to the gym. Then I'll take the dogs and hike up a mountain and give the speech. Right, hiking up the mountain after not sleeping, blah blah. And I just want to. If everything goes wrong when I'm on stage in front of 5,000 people, I want to be able to hold it together. And because the other thing is, I've been on, on and off. I've been on stage since I was 11 years old, doing one thing or another. And I've seen everything that could possibly go wrong, from the lights fall down into the audience, to the sound goes away, to the screens don't work, to, somebody's having an epileptic seizure in the third row. All that stuff happens. And I want to be able to do my job no matter what. So I just train to be able to do my job if like I'm getting punched in the mouth, and it's really sort of saved my ass.
Yeah, I always do that. I think a good practice. I learned this from. My acting teacher was Jeffrey Tambor. If you don't know him, he's one of the great actors, and he was the star of Transparent, and he's done a lot of stuff. But he was such an astonishing actor, and I spent way too long in acting class. But I remember he used to say, "You've got this, you've got the lines, you've got the scenes, you have your confines, you have your parameters. But the way you become a spontaneous, instinctive actor, a reactive actor, is to start everything before you walk out on stage with, I don't know. Let's see what happens." And every time I walk out on stage, I'm not quite sure what's going to happen. Like I like to kind of feel, I just make my mind a blank, because I want to be affected by the first thing I see. And I want to see where that takes me. Might be somebody's tattoo, might be somebody's hair, might be the room itself. I don't know. But I think that's a good way to go about it, right? That's kind of how you fight rigidity and being predictable and being too combed. Be a little bit dangerous.
I think one of your specials, you walk out and get the first 5 minutes goes to the guy's hair and his mustache, because you get so swept into it.
His hair and mustache. How can I?
Oh my God, I totally understand. No, I understand. It was a good choice.
Yeah. So that's right. So that's always something to keep in mind, and I think that's really helpful. I think that's helpful in everything. I don't know, because you don't, and I will guarantee things are going to come up. Certainly in your life, you got a lot of plans, and all of a sudden, it's like, wait a minute, I was on my way, and you guys tripped me up. So,
yeah, that's interesting, Bryan. Stephen, I want to ask you about that and the flow literature. Is there anything that comes to mind in flow science that relates to what Bryan's mentioning there around that kind of openness and detachment from the plan and the outcome as you're entering into a task? Because I'm sure it even applies to skiing as well. If you're rigidly fixed on how you want the run to go, it affects performance.
I'm going to back into that. I want to start with the peak performance aging, because it's like when you get into the science of aging, there are every now and then you stumble on these facts that you're just like, holy crap, that like just mind blowing. And one of them is that openness to experience directly, like when it goes, when it declines, and this isn't true of any of the other big 5 personality traits. Openness to experience is the only one that's correlated with cognitive decline and memory. And the minute your openness to experience closes down, cognitive decline onset is usually within a year. And mortality follows fairly quickly afterwards, which is sort of wild. So I think, Bryan, so here's a question off of this, and to sort of as a answer to Rian's question, how much, when I think about the preparation, the lines, the improv happens often inside the thing that you've done 100 times. You practice the thing 100 times. You're still going to do that, but you're going to freestyle off of that. And I often think, the line between I see it sometimes with thought leaders who are like, I just stop preparing my speeches. I just go in and talk. And I'm like, to me, it's the rudest, most thing you could do. I'm like, that's a narcissist. That's a narcissist there who's prioritizing how they feel on the inside over the audience's experience. Performers, it seems to me, and professionals freestyle inside the lines, not outside the lines, which tends to also be really flowy if you get it right.
Yeah, I think so. The challenge, you'd asked about audiences. What's actually interesting is I noticed there's a huge difference between socioeconomic classes and cultures and what they laugh at. Huge. So if I'm in New York and there are a bunch of white, wealthy professionals in their 30s and 40s and 50s, it's very interesting because there are a lot of things going on. Number one, they've already kind of arrived at their conclusions because, hey, their conclusions have worked for them. So they're not so willing to be shaken up. And if they are, they resist quickly. They get quiet and polite, right? They tend to laugh and then they stop and you've got to get their next laugh. There's no rolling. There's no letting go. There's no getting swept up in the moment, right? They never forget that they've got to get home at a certain hour. They never forget that they've got a whole bunch of other human things to do. One of the great things about art is letting it take you over, and you forget about your biology. You forget you're human sometimes, right? That's why we go to great movies, listen to great music, or we go and laugh, because it just brings you together and you're like, everything's okay no matter what's going on. But I notice that people who tend to be that way, very wealthy and have quote unquote won at life in their own mind, they are a tighter audience. That might be more of a challenge to get into flow if you're paying attention to them. Then you go down to Miami, you go down to Fort Lauderdale, and the audience is mostly Latin, mostly, Italian, mostly kind of, they live in their heart, they live in their belly, they live in their spirit. There's just something more. They dance from their hips. You ever watch like people from Connecticut dance? They look like they're made of when their shoulders are moving, and then you get into sort of like below the equator in South America, and everything is happening somewhere else, man. And they allow themselves they allow it to take themselves over. They get sort of enraptured in the spirit of the thing, and then the laughter starts to roll. And that's when you don't have to worry about anything, man, because you're skiing, you're swimming with the whole thing. And it's just it's almost like this beautiful sort of like movement. We're all jiving together. We're dancing together. It's really cool. And that makes it much easier to get into flow. Right. And so that's just something I thought of as I was talking. Yeah.
That's interesting.
Rian, one thing I know for sure, every now and again, you'll end up on a stage or I'll end up on a stage where you can't see the audience at all. The lights are in such a way that you're just fucking blind. For me to get into flow, and I don't wear I wear glasses to drive. So my distance vision isn't great. But I always have to find one or two or three people in the audience to watch. Like I can't watch the whole audience, but I choose the handful of people. That's my immediate feedback, right? You can't steer an audience. You can't get into flow. You can't do any of that without an immediate feedback. And it's hard. I can't look at a whole room. I don't know if you can do that. I can't look at a whole room and do that. I usually end up picking like 3 to 5 people and sort of like go from them to like take temperature and how am I doing? And that sort of thing.
Yeah. Ben Kingsley said that when he's doing Shakespeare, there comes a point when he's so in it and understands everything he's doing so well that he can count the audience members while he's delivering monologue. And I talked to him about that. I met him once. It was so funny. It's Ben Kingsley, Gandhi, etc. And I'm so startled. And the kids at the party are looking at me like I'm Elvis because I was the guy from MADtv. They don't even know who Ben Kingsley is. It was so surreal. I'm like, what the hell's going on? But I talked to him about that. He said, yeah, that can happen sometimes. That's all he told me.
Stephen, from a neuroscience and peak performance standpoint, what is happening when you have a level of automaticity that is so great that you can essentially conscious parallel processing like that?
What's weird about that is we all sort of have more access to that than we know. If you put on a mask, you're going to find it's more fluid. You're able to do more of this. Or if you talk in a funny voice, right? Suddenly you're funnier. You're finding more punchlines. And some of it is that you're just clearing a lot of the ego out of the way, which means the prefrontal cortex, the things that get active in the prefrontal cortex that block flow sort of get out of the way. And I mean, I can tell you that when people are on a roll, all that kind of fast intuition and far-flung creativity, outside the box thinking, that's all the anterior cingulate cortex. And it only can do that when it's very relaxed. So if there's norepinephrine in the system, if there's anxiety in the system, it will block that. In some ways. So there's got to be a real, first of all, probably a lot of emotional management on the front end to just, be able to keep that pretty even. And some sort of, I think it comes on whenever you get actual distance from yourself. So especially it doesn't surprise me that he's doing Shakespeare and that's happening because you're already talking in, iambic pentameter from 3 centuries ago. It's already a funny voice. compared to how we speak normally. So I those are the things I think about with that. I've always wanted to study it more because I'm fascinated by how much access you get to creativity by putting on a mask or talking, if changing something that lowers your ego a little bit, and suddenly there's a flood that's available, and it's interesting to me.
Well, you're speaking. It's very interesting as you speak, because you're speaking like a scientist and a materialist, and it's very interesting how you're breaking it down and you're talking about different parts of the brain. I never go there, and the reason I don't go there is I think what we're talking about when we're talking about flow, you might be in something. I'm romantic, so I'm going to say this. You might be in something called the truth. It might be that you are communicating with not just your ego, but your shadow as well. I'll expand on that for a second, but this is what I really think. Do you know Fiona Apple, the singer?
Sure.
She won Artist of the Year and when she was 9. And I knew her, and we were driving. We went to dinner, and then she said, I want to sing. And we went to a place called Largo, and she got up and sang, and she was cutting her album, and she sang like 5 songs. I know a little bit about singing, but what I noticed is that she did no vocal warm-up, nothing, got up on the piano after a full meal, started playing, and sang better than she sounds on the album. And we were driving home, and I said, how did you do that? She goes, what do you mean? I go, well, your voice sounds as clear and strong with no finagling or anything, and you didn't warm up. And she said this she didn't even know what she was saying. She's just a very modest person. She goes, well, you just tell the truth and everything else takes care of itself, and that's where I go. I think, Stutz, this guy, Phil Stutz, there's a documentary on Netflix I recommend to everybody. Jonah Hill did essentially a documentary about his therapist. And Phil Stutz works with a lot of actors. And I wish I'd known this a long time ago. But what actors do, he said, is they go in for the audition and they tell their shadow, this Jungian notion of the shadow and the light, right? Like they tell the darker side of their personality, the angels of their lesser nature. They say, hey, can you guys wait outside here? Because I got to go in there and wow them and be charming. And the shadow goes, really? Oh, you're going to leave me out here? Cool. Well, I'll tell you what, roundly fuck you. And I'll be here when you're done. And so you go in there trying to pull a fast one with just your ego, with just the bright side, the good side of yourself, the charming, cheeky side of yourself. And guess what? You don't get the part. You don't get the part. Because whether we know it or not, you can tell when somebody's lying. You don't even know it. All of us, for the most part, if you're tuned in, are expert lie detectors. I've always said that. Get away with nothing. And maybe the most important thing about trying to get into flow is maybe you're getting close. It's like that Schiller. What did Schiller say? Man is never more himself than when at play. Play not being hookers in the 8-ball, but play being that thing you would do for its own sake. And I think when you're at play, I think all of you comes to the game. And I don't think it's possible to get into flow. I really don't, unless all the bullshit is stripped away. When I read your book, I thought to myself, you're doing some pretty scary shit in your 50s, and mistakes can be bad for you. I mean, you go through what you did to your body. If you're in your head, and if you're doing this for the wrong reason, good luck, man, because you literally are on a razor's edge. And everything has to be timing, and everything has to be no doubt. There's got to be no doubt, because you're doing it for the right reason, right? So to me, I guess, instead of going into all that, I think flow might be more available to you if you focus on trying to bring your whole self to the game. Might be another way of saying the truth. But again, I'm a romantic. I like those kind of conversations. I wish I could break into a song right now, Stephen, but I'm not a singer.
Ryan, I wish you could break into a song right now too, just for comedy value.
Thank you.
I always say this in writing, and I learned it really from reading Joan Didion more than anything else. But in great writing, I always say you got to tell the truth, tell the truth, tell the truth. And it's always 3 times, because there's like a third layer deep where you're actually like, oh yeah, this is the real truth. And when you get to there, right, when you get to there, that's when, I mean, and NAR countries are really funny, interesting, weird example, because I had to, for that book to work, you had to see way more of me than like I like anybody to see, for one, right?
Somebody, I want to interrupt you because on this point that you're about to make, somebody just said something. One of our listeners, you learn more about, this is Tim Thompson, I think. You learn more about a person in an hour of play than in a year of conversation. That was Plato. So keep going, because I want you to.
No, the other, no, then it's right off the comments. The other, totally 100%, 80% different. But one of the, did a lot of research for NAR country into authenticity. It's very important for peak performance aging, right? You really want to be yourself. But also NAR country was a lot about play. So it turns out the cutting edge of play research is we all have an authentic play style, literally an authentic play style. It's probably visible in micro expressions. And, we probably are aware when other people are doing that. So I was listening to you talk and I think, there's a science side to all this. We have fancy words for it. This takes us nowhere farther than anything you said, but it has a term. I've got a term, God damn it.
So, well, Stephen, on that note, I remember, you tell a story about before writing Stealing Fire, you asking, where does the information come from? Which kind of reminds me of Brian's comment about truth and the truth and being in the truth. Could you describe kind of what you meant by that question of where does the information come from, and obviously how it relates to flow and intuition, et cetera?
Yeah. I always say that this flow science can really comfortably explain like 93% of everything that happens in a flow state. But there's about 7% that feels a little magical, right? Feels like you're channeling more than writing, or that sort of thing. And it's, I can talk about pattern recognition and amplify it all of it. Still doesn't change the fact that the experience of it on the inside is, holy crap, there's a little bit magical. And that's when you always start turning to the people around you, just like, do you see that, to that, right? Like, it's not just me, you're saying, right, have that too. And so the question is, in flow states and really deep intuitive moments, where does the information come from? I've always, not arguing for metaphysics, but even at a biological level, it's an interesting question. And if you want to introduce metaphysics into it, it's a much more interesting question. And I've always thought that was the one of the fundamental questions that drew me to this work, is where does the stream, it's so high quality and so interesting. That was just sort of the core question. And, it led to a lot of the ideas in Stealing Fire, a lot of the ideas in Mapping Cloud 9. Probably even back in West to Jesus, I was poking at those kinds of questions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I want to actually ask you both, because I think the experience of having that sort of sense of channeling or information, coming through flow can vary dramatically. Like, Stephen, you have a very extreme example that you can give with a small furry prayer. We wrote that whole book basically in, 2 weeks of an uninterrupted flow state. But Brian, to start with you, I'm curious if you have any one moment or example when, you were in a flow-like state and the information, or whatever you want to call it, was coming through you in a way that was unparalleled to any other time, where, I don't know, maybe your ability to improv, for example, was dramatically amplified.
The times I think were the most profound were when I was, in acting class or on stage doing a play, and I had to be very emotional. So if you do Long Day's Journey into Night and you're playing, forgive me guys, I forgot the character I played, but the oldest brother, if you walk on and your mother isn't a heroin addict, if you don't hate your father, and if your little brother isn't dying of tuberculosis and you're not drunk, then don't walk on stage, because they're not going to believe you. And getting into that state is so terrifying, and any of that difficult work like Tennessee Williams plays or any of that stuff, or Eugene O'Neill, any of the great playwrights. I think when it is imperative to the story that you come on, let's say, a broken person, or that you come on and this is the moment when it's sort of a do or die, and we see what you're willing to fight for, and you're willing to die for it. This is these dramatic moments in a play or in a movie. If you're not there, if you're not in it, I'm thinking of my friend wrote and directed Monster with Charlize Theron, and she won an Oscar. She won an Oscar, and I was watching the dailies, and Charlize had to ask for help for the first time. The character, Eileen Morris, had to ask Christina Ricci's character for help. She'd never done it before because she'd been brutalized from the age of 13. She needed help. And you see her asking this girl she's in love with for help. She'd never done it before. And they weren't getting it. And they needed the light. It had to be a certain shot, and they had one more shot at it. And I remember Patty Jenkins, who was the director-writer, said, I'll pay for this last shot, because they ran out of film. It was before we had the digital stuff. And you could see, I watched the daily, and I watched Charlize Theron just went, and they went and did it. My mother and Patty were editing it. I was behind them watching this, and I started to cry. I didn't want them to see I was crying, so I'm behind them like this, and because her flow state put me in flow state. It was so powerful, it was so contagious that I would argue that when you are in that danger zone, and it is a danger zone, man. It's a danger zone. If you're really going to go out there as an artist, if you're going to swing as a jazz musician and find your way back, or if you're going to do something crazy, like Meryl Streep does or whatever, and move an entire audience that we talk about forever. Robert De Niro in Deer Hunter, that Russian roulette scene. Oh my God, that's the danger zone. But I'm going to tell you something that changes the world, because when you watch that and you watch that person in flow, not only do you believe them, but you get put in flow yourself. Mm-hmm. And maybe the answer is that I did a play once that I wrote, and I didn't know what to expect. I was terrified, but it was an emotional drama. And I heard the audience, when there was a break, I heard people going, and I could hear people crying. And I was like, oh man, I guess my flow was contagious in that moment. And I think we stay alive for those moments. I really do. So I guess the answer to your question is maybe the times I've really been there, it was not recorded. It was in some acting class or on some stage in front of 60, 70, 80 people.
So, Stephen, I want to ask you, Stephen, in a second, actually, about watching flow, because me and you both for the last couple of years were injured, and I know we were watching a lot of flow with ski videos and things like that while we couldn't do it. But Bryan, before we do that, I just want to ask you, how does your psychology change when you're taking on a character like that outside of the moment of the acting itself? Do you notice that during the weeks or months, that you're filming or acting like that, and you're really embodying a character and all of the emotions that they possess, that things like empathy change toward people that are related to the character? Or is there any effect like that?
I wish I had a romantic, dramatic answer for you. I'm the wrong guy to ask. You might want to ask me that. But I will say that anytime that you are, anytime you're actually playing a real character and you're dealing with real material, you better be telling the truth, and you better be mining your own sort of heart and insides, because that's all you really actually have. That's all you have, and then you'll bring something unique. If you try to emulate or mimic something that inspired you, you're in trouble. So sometimes you gotta just trust that you're enough. That's a bitch. I don't know, that's a bitch. And I don't know. By the way, I'm not even so sure I'm that good at it. I might be the wrong guy. Ask somebody else that. I wish I was. I wish I had an elaborate answer. But I will say this, that I think that Christian Bale, I think Meryl Streep, I think that Daniel Day-Lewis, I think they spend so much time getting into character, living that character, and wearing the costumes because they have to. Because acting is that hard for them. Because they don't trust themselves otherwise. There are people that are insanely instinctual, like Anthony Hopkins, Leonardo DiCaprio. These people are instinctive. They can just do stuff. Robert Downey Jr. is just instinct. He's instinct. But some people have to work at it hard, and they have to be obsessive. And that would be De Niro. That would be Meryl Streep. That would be Daniel Day-Lewis, Christian Bale. That's what I think. I don't think they're doing it to be anything other than, I think they have to. I think that they're so insecure at their own inadequacy. They're so aware of their own inadequacy. And I think there are a lot of writers like that. John Irving said that. And I think all of us have to have some of that.
Yeah, that's interesting, Brian.
There are no secrets, man. There are no secrets. Nobody has anything on the ball. Nobody has anything over anybody else. The one thing about being 56 is I know that. Right? You know what I mean? Don't tell me there's a secret room where everybody has the elite have like, get the fuck out of here. It's all hard all the time. It's always almost impossible and mostly impossible. And you're going to fail most of the time. And you're going to take more than you give, and you're going to be wrong more than you're right. And so it goes. Stephen Jobs said, when I realized, not Steve Jobs, a very smart guy, but I thought it was interesting. He goes, when I realized that everything around me was made by people no smarter than me, everything changed for me. I mean, now it's Stephen Jobs, fucking genius, but still, I like the idea that it might not be as, it's not out of reach. Anybody listening, there's this tendency, that stuff's out of reach for me. I don't think so.
Yeah, you're reminding me of Stephen here, honestly. Stephen, you always say peak performance is a checklist. Do you agree with Brian there?
Yeah, I mean, this is the statement I made over and over and over after like Art of Impossible, which is like, I spent my life trying to get in the room when the impossible becomes possible and meeting the people who pulled that off and asking them, how did you do that over and over? And as much as at least anybody alive that I know of, these are extraordinary people who have done extraordinary things, but none of them, not a single person I met along the way, started out extraordinary. They start out just like you and me. They do extraordinary things. And when you meet them up close and get to know them, that's the how human people are, is what's so visible. The other thing I was thinking of is I was having a conversation with Sarah Sarkis, a brilliant psychologist who does some work with the Flow Research Collective, and some of you may know, about relationships and relationship troubles. And she said, look, it's a little bit like peak performance. You said it all goes back to kind of neuroscience. She's like, with relationships, Bowlby laid out these 4 different attachment styles. They go wrong in very predictable ways. So no matter how unique you think your relationship situation is, there's literally only 4 ways it goes wrong, and we know what they are. And that's what we all go through. It's, I've said it over and over and over again, humans are very simple machines. That could be like a humiliating thing or a beautiful thing, depending on how you want to look at it. But despite, our real, like, I think there's something about like wanting to be super unique that allows us to feel immortal. But we're very, very similar under the hood.
I want to take a second, guys, and then I'm going to mention NAR country. After that, I'm going to ask you both just about how your approach is. I think you guys are the same age exactly, which is kind of endearing, by the way. But
he's got a few months on me. He's wiser.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, my son.
You both looking good as well.
My Stephen calls me daddy.
It was daddy, but
Yeah, so I'll ask you both in a second just about how your approaches to skill acquisition and performance and creativity have changed over the years. Before I do that, I just want to mention, Stephen, your new book, NAR Country, Growing Old, Staying Rad, which came out on Tuesday. And we have a special offer. And it's actually the last time we're going to be doing one of these bulk buys, because we're now 4 days after the official launch date. So if you buy 10 copies of NAR Country, which is an amazing book to be able to give away, really fun book to be able to give away, especially to people who are 50 and above, you will get $4,000 in free bonuses. And I'm just going to list a few of them. There's about a dozen, so I'm not going to go through them all. You're going to get a masterclass in mindset, a guide to the superpowers of aging, a NAR Country peak performance cheat sheet, which is a really cool infographic that's going to kind of synthesize all of the key elements of peak performance aging for you, so you can use that as a checklist. You're also going to get a live call with Stephen, Flourishing to the Finish Line, which is a kind of a rare opportunity to do a call with Stephen and one of our team members who's a Harvard human flourishing researcher, Dr. Jonathan Beal. And they're going to be talking about how to flourish the whole way through to old age. And then you're also going to get full access to Flow for Writers, which is, one of Stephen's kind of infamous products that we've been working on for many years. That's normally retails for $3,000 in and of itself. And finally, just for this call, you're also going to get access to the training itself, GNAR Country, which, Stephen, I'd actually love for you to just give a quick comment on that, because I know you put a tremendous amount of work into that last year. So the training itself, GNAR Country, you'll get access to if you order the 10-book bulk buy in the chat there. It's not in the chat, sorry. It's on the green button there. If you click that, you can check out, you can order the 10-book bulk buy. Stephen, can you give us a quick comment on the GNAR Country training itself? Because again, I know that was one of your main projects from last year.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to keep most of the science out of the book. It's a book about applied peak performance, so it's much more about what's going on a day-to-day basis. But the science is remarkably thick and remarkably useful, and so we took all of that, essentially the footnotes and everything under the hood of all the peak performance aging experiments we ran, and recorded 25 hours worth of content. And I think it's the most thorough peak performance aging course anybody's ever built. And certainly one of those, Kurt, and it's really fun. And, we ran it a bunch of times, and people got amazing results with it. We wanted to see if, we could explode people's mindsets around aging and really set them on a path to peak performance aging. And, I think like 350 people went through the first round of that training, and it really changed some lives, which was cool. So that's what that is.
Yep. And just to emphasize again, even if you've ordered a bulk buy before and you've gotten a lot of these other bonuses, this is the only time we're giving actual access to the GNAR Country training as well. So for less than $300, you get 10 copies and all of those bonuses I just mentioned. So it's a steal. And you go for it. Stephen's shaking his head in pain here because he knows how much time you put into that training, and it's very affordable on this call. So anyway, I encourage people to go ahead with that. And so I want to ask you both, over the decades, you've both been in your respective games for many, many, many years at this point. How have your approaches changed to peak performance, to creativity, and to accessing flow? And Bryan, I'll start with you. I'm curious, if you think back to yourself as an up-and-comer in your 20s versus now, what are the differences before going out on stage? Yeah. Practicing.
The problem with getting older is getting relaxed and too complacent and too and losing your hunger, because there's something like that you just cannot believe about writing something and getting them to laugh. You're like, what and how the hell did I do this? Like, it just comes together. You're doing it for like an hour and 15 minutes, whatever. You're just like, and it's working, and you don't even remember writing it. And it's just this magical time that for me really lasted forever. But you will get to a point sometimes where that sensation and that phenomenon, you can become inoculated to that. You can kind of get, I don't know what the word is, the first time you step into a Ferrari, you're like, look at these seats, man. It's like the first time you ride a dolphin. I'm sure it's pretty exciting, right? You're like, I'm riding a dolphin. If you rode a dolphin every day for a year, you'd be like, this fucking...
Dude, I've been riding a dolphin to work every day for a couple of years now, and the high never really goes away, I got to say.
It never goes away. Bad example, then. Bad example, Stephen. I'm sorry. You get water in your nose, but you have gills, so it's not fair. But for the most part, for most of us, you can get used to anything, no matter how fantastic. And I think that's why you got to get back to the why. What are you doing this for? And if it's just for yourself, you're in trouble. So maybe I keep trying to think of different ways to inspire myself, different ways to keep myself motivated. It's always hard to write something funny, and because I have to surprise myself first for you to be surprised.
Yeah.
Right. So that challenge never goes away. So maybe some days I just would rather do anything else than sit still until something happens. God, I hate that. And then like Stephen said, man, it's like, it's vulnerable. It's like, I don't know, what happens if I write the whole thing and nobody reads it? What if you do the whole thing and nobody cares? But they won't. And you can't worry about that. You got to do it because that's what you do. And I guess maybe that Stephen Pressfield wrote that book, The War for Art. And he's talking about Somerset Maugham, who I love as a writer. And he said, the muse hits me at 5:30 in the morning, every morning, because I sit down and I just start writing. So, I'm not waiting for the muse. And so maybe I don't know, how has my approach changed? I guess I find it harder to just show up and I don't know, maybe stay as hungry as I was, which is a terrible thing.
Well, the point you made on becoming desensitized to the, to the high is a really interesting one. We had Laird Hamilton, the big wave surfer, on, and he was saying that, it makes him fall asleep surfing a double overhead at this point, and he has to, it has to be like triple overhead on a foil for him to get into flow at this point. So you just get continually desensitized. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Right. That's the problem, man. And then you get closer and closer to the flame. And what you just heard was a guy who has to kind of keep getting a little closer to death. Yeah. And this is why a lot of these tip of the spear operators, these special forces guys, keep going back into the theater once more into the round, because everything else is a bore, man. And you got to just keep getting a little closer. Okay, you got to stay close to that flame, because if you don't feel alive anymore. A big liability. So beware of that.
Yeah. Yes. Stephen, on your side, I know you've talked about this in different ways, but I'm curious if anything, fresh is coming to mind there as far as changes to your approach to writing and your work in general over the last 3 decades.
I was listening to Bryan talk, and I was thinking, so I've worked with the same editor, Michael Wharton, for a couple of decades now, and it was built on, it was an immediate feedback thing. You just, like, as a writer working with a publisher, your editor will read your book like once or twice. That's all the feedback you get. And I was like, that doesn't work for me, right? He gets to go bomb on a comedy club every night for like 3 months while he's working out his act. I was like, I need somebody, and Michael, it turns out, is both, my best friend and I think the best editor I've ever worked with. But so much of what I do is because I want him to laugh or him to go, wow, I see what you did there with that sentence. It's really odd, but there's on a lot of levels, my books are in a sense written for that one audience first and then everybody else. But it's, a lot of it is the motivation to show up every morning is also I know he's going to read it twice a week. And when I've laid a turd, and you can tell, Michael stumbles over words and he'll get mad every now and again. I'll be like, what the fuck are you doing to me? This is terrible. What are you doing? Because it's such an unflowy session. It's great to have that sort of honest feedback that you get. But I think when I think about how my work has changed, I mean, a lot of the knucklehead stuff is gone and it's much more precise. And Bryan is right on a certain level, but so much of what I want is just feedback from a couple of people. And when the book is done, it's the first 5 or 6 people. What do you think? Is it funny? Did it move you in this way? Did you learn what I was hoping you would learn? Or and can I live with the randoms? If that makes sense. People always find stuff in your work that you didn't intend to be there, and it starts coming up when people are reading, and you're like, oh shit, okay, I did that. I didn't know if I want to do that. But yeah, that's what I don't know if that it's not. It's an immediate feedback point from a peak performance perspective, but ultimately, I think it's sort of just about intimacy in a weird way.
That's interesting. Yeah, I actually want to ask you both about energy, Bryan, because what you were saying about the risk of complacency makes me think of energy. And one of the promises of GNAR country, or the claims it makes at least, is that you don't need to get geezered. You don't need to become kind of increasingly feeble as the years go on. How have you both found your energy shift?
He gets kicked in the face by tiny baby feet on a daily basis, so that's most.
Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Yeah,
it keeps you sharp. That's,
by the way, so true. Yeah, energy is a huge one, man. Energy is I don't know about you, Stephen, but I'm very particular now about how I eat and what I don't eat, and my sleep is really important and all that bullshit, man. I mean, energy is it's that precious commodity. It really is. But I love the idea of trying to figure out ways to work around fatigue, make it work for you, kind of be a witness to it. I mean, energy is always elusive, I think, right, Stephen? I don't know. For me,
No, I mean, you know, it's funny. I was having a conversation yesterday with my friend Adam Fisher, who's an author and was my old editor at Wired, and he was talking about how we're having this incredibly detailed conversation about what we do in our lives to be able to get a second good writing session in the afternoon, right?
Yeah.
And like, especially if you have a really good sort of writing session in the morning, if you like, and I think every creative and probably everybody entrepreneur, every business, like to get 2 or 3 solid work sessions out of a day where you can really pour yourself into them.
Yeah.
That is like, that's a lifetime negotiation, right? Like, and you're always tuning that and always tuning that. And I don't even know if it's, I think I've done that my whole life, one way or another. There was always some kind of energy management, something going on. I think I've just gotten sort of better at knowing what I need and, you know, sort of better at avoiding the things that are bad for me along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. You get more delicate. I have news for you as you get older. You get more delicate. Like if I have 2 glasses of wine, oh my God, the next morning I'm like, my head hurts, you know?
Yeah.
Like I used to be able to run it hard. I was born with a lot of energy. You know, I got whatever. I got good genetics for that, you know, but it doesn't matter, man. Now I got to keep everything, you know, staying elastic and, you know, you got to be, that's where self-restriction comes in, but it makes you feel better, you know?
Yeah, that's interesting. So Stephen, I want to ask you a quick comedy question. I actually want to ask, because we've had a few comics on the show and whatnot over the years. What do you most admire about comics when it comes to flow and creativity?
Well, one is the lapse. I love that about comics, and I love that you really have to get up and say the same thing 1,000, 2,000 times and microtune it. Writing is a lot like that. And so whenever I see craft that requires like that much sort of attention to detail, and ultimately I think good writing and good comedy, what they share in common in a sense is if you've done your work, if the person on the other end has done their work, Brian's done his work, I don't see the work. The finished product just looks right. You look at In Our Country, it's a fun adventure story. It's funny. You don't realize that this is, from a writing perspective, one of the hardest things I've ever had to do. And it was really fucking complicated to write it, right? So I let this, I mean, there's a lot I love. And it, you know, and some of it is just like Brian does a thing where he will say a half word or a half sentence. He'll start a thought and intentionally cut it off and go someplace else and let the audience finish the joke in their head, or, you know, all that stuff. You can do that in writing too. Like that, the level of like, I called him up. We had a conversation a couple of weeks ago where I was like, I wanted to know how he got a certain physical stance. Like, where did it come from? And I think it was the question about when you said the line is, I speak Chinese, but you cut it off like half, like cha, you don't even get anywhere there. And I wanted to know how many times you run that line before you decided it was like the where you cut it off, because I know you tested every combo.
Yeah, if I say Kung Fu, I was training in Kung Fu. Sorry, I speak Chinese. And that's all you have to hear. You're just like, because I'm moving on to the next joke, but that's a throwaway, nothing, but that's the best part, right? Those are the kinds of things that you say. How do you stay in shape? I lift weights, I run, I street fight, you know, I do constant stuff, power fucking, and you keep moving, whatever it is, but you're moving on to talk. So that's when you give the audience the benefit of the doubt. They can pick up on shit so much faster than you think. Every audience is so much smarter than you think. So, and filling in the blanks is a lot of fun too.
I love that. That's hilarious. It's a great point. My funniest friends do that now that you mention it. So, Stephen, you told me some hilarious stories just about hanging out with big groups of comics back in the day in LA in the 90s and whatnot. But Brian, you know, you spent a lot of time with a lot of obviously professional comedians, I'd love if you could give a breakdown of just what it's like, you know, spending an evening, having a dinner or whatever with just a bunch of comics.
Group of sons of bitches ever.
Yeah, versus normal population.
I mean, they're all fucking, you know, they're all. It's like my buddy's a SEAL Team 6 guy, and I said to him, man, I love being around these tip of the spear guys because they're such good guys. They're so well rounded. They're just team players, and they're so smart, and they have such diverse interests, and they're such lateral thinkers. And my buddy just looked at me and he goes, God, you're so fucking wrong. You know, and I said, geez, what do you mean? He goes, they're all putting their best foot forward. So the romance of being, but I will say that comics are a very rare group of people. It's a rare and very small fraternity. You know, I happen to be friends with the best in the world, people that can make anyone anywhere laugh for over an hour straight and hard. But, you know, I always say, if you come to one of my friends' shows, or not to be a jerk, but even mine, I promise you'll laugh harder than you have in any movie. I promise. And you'll laugh harder and longer. That's just that's the game. That's the bag of tricks that we do, right? And that's a really very peculiar and rather unique skill set. And so when you're around people that negotiate the world, when they look at the world in a funny way because they have to, and sometimes they might put a gun in their mouth. You know, you got some pretty dark people out there, but comedy is a way of coping with pain. It's a way of coping with things. But when you are with a bunch of comics, you're on that frequency, right? You're on that frequency. You're all speaking the same language. You're all making each other laugh. And that is called intimacy. And intimacy is a very, very rare thing. Intimacy is when you all speak the same language and when nobody else speaks it, and when you feel at home with this band of misfits. And all my friends are misfits, but in the most wonderful way. And some of them are impossibly successful, and others are not. But when we're all together, it's a little bit like the Hajj when you go to Mecca and you wear just 2 sheets. Everybody's kind of, everybody's in that group, and nobody, don't tell me you fly private, I don't give a shit. We're all, it's all the same fucking struggle. I got to make them laugh tomorrow. And so I think in that sense, you know, I've been lucky enough to be friends with some of the best comics ever and some of the funniest people in the world. And it's always, if we're not teasing each other, we're laughing with each other. Although the comics are not, they're also not team players, okay? So at the other side of it is we're solitary creatures. Yeah. It's not like there's a big team spirit in the fucking comedy world, let me tell you. Yeah. And I think they'd all say that. So, yeah. Is
there much of a correlation between, you know, someone's funniness on stage as a comic and in person casually? And do you ever get the opposite of that? There's not.
All the time. More often
Interesting.
than not, comics that are really funny can tend to be very serious.
Interesting.
You know? Or certainly not as silly, you know.
Yeah. And then vice versa as well sometimes.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But some people are just always being silly and hilarious. It just depends. But there are a lot of comics that are very serious about life, you know, and neurotic, very neurotic, angry, you know, afraid, depressed. Thank God. And I say, thank God, you know, lemonade out of lemons.
Stephen, what have your experiences been spending time with comics over the years?
Pretty much everything Bryan just said. What struck me the most is they'll talk in punchlines. So they won't bother telling the jokes. They know each other's jokes. So they'll a lot of the conversation will be just like punchline after punchline after punchline after punchline. If you're not a real comedy aficionado, you have no idea what the hell's going on. Right, at all. It's just, you're just like, what? And they're laughing and they're dying, and you can't even follow that. So that was the first thing I realized. Is I was like, oh, it's a language, it's a profession, it's a trade. This is like, okay, I get all that. And I also got when it's a room full of comics sitting around like a poker table or whatever, you have to really earn the big laugh. Like if you're going to get a big laugh out of that group, like you got to work so hard. You got to do something so outrageous. So that was sort of the other thing that I noticed. But no, I mean, creatives are all very similar, right? They're people who have found ways to take their emotions and turn them into art. one way or another. That where we started the conversation. That's one of the original things. So like every creative always has the same. You had to figure out how the fuck to get paid as a creative. Chances are you were a weird kid. So you had to find your tribe. And so those two things, people always, ask me questions like, what's your origin story? And the truth of the matter is I had to figure out how to get paid to write. Like that was that big puzzle. And I had to figure out where my tribe is. And I think all creatives solve those puzzles. And like, we have that in common. So it doesn't really matter. That was, I think, the thing. Doesn't matter how famous you are one way or another, because those are the two problems you're still trying to solve.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's really interesting you say about the punchlines, because you're so right about that, Stephen. Like, I never thought of that until you said that. Will Sasso, I don't know if you guys know him, but he's a genius. He's one of the funniest people ever. He played Curly in Three Stooges. He was on MADtv. He's more of an actor, but he can do stand up with his eyes closed. He can do anything. He's one of those guys, kind of like Michael Jordan of comedy, in my opinion, like just hilarious. And he'll do things to me like out of nowhere, which most people don't even know what's going on. My wife is like, "What's going on?" I'm just laughing because I'll just get a picture of a bear in the distance. I'll just get a text of a bear in the distance on my phone. I'm like, "Here goes," and then I'll be like, "Hey," and then I'll just get another picture of the bear, but this time the bear's a little closer. Now Will's 330 pounds, and it's mostly muscle and bone. He's just a giant man, and then I'll be like, "What's going on?" And then I'll get another picture, like about 3 minutes later, another picture of the bear, and the bear's even closer. And I'm like, "Hey, dude, I don't know what you're doing, but this, the bear's just this giant, menacing grizzly bear." And then out of nowhere, I'll just get another picture of the bear, and now the bear's right there in the picture. And I'm like, "Hey!" And then the final picture about 5 minutes later is this bear ripping a seal in half, or just ripping a caribou, and it's just so clearly sort of a joke that only I get, which is just, "I'm going to tear you apart because I'm a bear and you're basically prey," and that's all he says, and he never responds to anything. Or I'll be on the road doing a gig, and I'll get a picture of my house. And then I'll get a picture of and I'll be like, "Hey, you're in my neighborhood." And I'll get nothing. And I'll just get a picture then of my door. and then I'll be like, "What are you doing?" And then I'll get a picture of the little window in my door. I'll get a picture of the inside of my house. And I'm like, "Hey, bro." And the next thing I know, I'm like, "What are you doing?" And I won't hear anything. And I'll get like just an empty thought cloud. And then I'm like, "What are you doing?" And then there's just a picture of him with a blank face, 330 pounds, with both my small children in each arm. Like that. I'm like, "No!" And I'm just howling because it's just our game. But that would be an example of how we communicate. Like, he never said a word. It's just pictures, and it's one breath after another, but it's fucking hilarious. So
That's hilarious.
All my friends are like, "I don't get it." And I'm like, "Well, that's because maybe you're not a comic or you don't speak in punchlines." But yeah,
that's a great example of speaking of punchlines. I love that. Yeah. It's hilarious. I just want to answer a couple of questions from the chat here that we're getting about the book buy. So if any of you have already done a smaller book buy, I would encourage you to go ahead, do the 10 books. You'll get all the bonuses I mentioned, the GNAR country training, Flow for Writers, and all of the other ones. And then you can just email support. And if you want to be if you want us to upgrade you and thus refund the smaller book buy you've already done, we can handle that. So if in doubt, just go ahead, click the green button there and do the checkout for the 10 books. And Rian and Adolfo in the chat will put our support email in the chat. We're really responsive there. So any logistical details we can solve with you there quickly. And I encourage you to grab those bulk copies of GNAR country. And then last question I want to ask both of you again, although Bryan, I'll start with you here, is just, what superpowers or strengths have you noticed improve over the last, let's say 5 to 10 years that maybe are actually thanks to age?
Oh, pattern recognition, right? You can walk across the street and I know your whole fucking life. I'm pretty good at figuring out what people are proud of and what they're ashamed of. I mean, I've been around too long. You get a sense of when something is too good to be true. When somebody comes to me and talks to me about the 3 steps you need to do to get to point Shangri-La, I run the other way. Get the fuck out of here. Anybody selling me salvation or immortality, I usually just kind of nod and run. So that's probably the best superpower I have, just everything. If I wrote a self-help book, you should buy it because it'll be one page and it just says, it takes forever. So, get out of here. Stephen, how many of those books have you read behind you? That's the big question here. That's all I've been thinking.
Well, so the good news for you is the top shelf directly over my head is the to read shelf. So the answer is that shelf, not all the others. Yes.
Oh, wow. Okay. I like it. It's very, very good.
Yeah. Yes. Stephen's reading is right.
Stephen, what are your superpowers? What have you figured out?
I don't know. I think there's more wisdom. There's more wisdom now in that, like, I can sort of more of the time I can see inside of my emotion. You know what I mean? I can see inside of my emotions or other people's emotions a lot more clearly. To me, the craziest thing in the world is like, because of the GNAR country experiment, some of like the superpowers that I'm performing better as an athlete now than I ever have before. So some of it is like stuff that like Ryan and I were talking about this the other day. Somebody asked us a question about like, do you miss your like 18-year-old athletic self? And Ryan, we were just like, are you kidding? I would crush the person I was now, like just destroy them. And some of that is wisdom, right? Some of that falls under, but that's the stuff that like, I don't know if it's a superpower. The stuff that sort of amazes me is that stuff because it's just surprising. And it's obviously at the heart of the peak performance aging message, but it doesn't really change the fact that it's the experience of it is kind of amazing.
Yeah, I think that I've gotten better at getting out of my own way and not being such a slave to the person I imagine I am, and maybe also learning to be a little nicer to myself. God, I'm such a dick to myself. I talk to myself in a way that it was just, it's just abusive. And I try not to do that anymore, but God.
Brian, so if you want, by the way, we've got a service, you can outsource your inner critic to the Flow Research Collective. And you don't even have to worry about it. And we'll just insult you in your head all day long. Don't even burn the energy. Don't even burn the calories. We can do that. We've got a subscription service. Yeah. It's going to be new.
Straight by text.
I got the web for that. That's the thing about criticism. People who criticize you are just like, it's like you don't say anything about me that I don't say about myself, man. Believe me, come into my head sometime. It's a constant process of I just got to stop being so fucking mean to myself. I've done my best.
What's helped with that, Brian, over the years?
What's that?
What's helped with that over the years?
Because maybe realizing that self-flagellation is masturbatory. It doesn't help anything, man. It just makes everybody around you miserable and yourself miserable, and it's not helpful. It just doesn't work, man. And I think that's kind of why and also like I just take a step back sometimes and I go, I've been trying so hard all the time. And that includes just trying to try hard, because a lot of times I don't, because I procrastinate and I suck in general. I'm just like, I don't want to. I want to be in a bath. I want to pet something soft. I don't know. I want to eat something sweet. I don't want to do anything. I hate work and I hate everything. See what I just did?
Stephen, do you ever get that? Do you ever get the I want to be in a bath and pet something soft mode?
No, usually mine is I want to frolic in wheat.
Now there you go, my friend. You don't have the hair for it, but I appreciate that. You look like cotton in wheat, dude. What's that cotton stalk doing, jumping up and down? Get that thing out of the wheat field, man. What happened? Who let that scarecrow out? How was that animatronic puppet running around? It's keeping the birds away, but I don't want to.
By the way, Rian, you wanted to know what it's like to hang out with comics? It's a lot like this. You try to insult them, and they will insult you for like 20 minutes.
You just get annihilated.
But you got a good body, Stephen. You're pretty jacked, so I appreciate that. You're built.
Yeah, it's the sad thing about the audible version of GNAR country.
I'm actually, if you know me, I'd like to frolic in a field of weed. But
wheat is good.
Wheat is Brian's line that I was stepping all over his line from one of his comedy specials.
Yeah, forgot about that.
Yeah, the problem with the audible version of GNAR Country, by the way, folks, is the topless selfie of Stephen is missing, unfortunately, if it's on audio. So just want to give that disclaimer. You'll have to get the paper version to see that. And,
okay, that's the weirdest ad I've ever heard for any of my products in my entire life. Because he's not wrong, but that's very strange.
It's impressive. It's an impressive topless selfie. It's worth getting the physical copies for. So with that, guys, I'm gonna wrap us here in a second. There's one kind of quirky audience question, Stephen, that I actually want to ask you, because I know there's actually kind of an interesting answer behind it, which is why the idea behind all your why all of your books have such different titles. So maybe you could speak a little bit to how you come up with the titles, because you're known for them.
Sometimes, and some of the stranger ones, Last Tango in Cyberspace, West of Jesus, a couple others, I had the title years before I ever had the book. I sort of like, I knew I had the title West of Jesus, and I knew it was sort of like at the intersection of the science of spirituality and neuroscience and surfing, which is a really weird thing to say out loud, but like I knew it, and I knew that was the title. And sometimes for me, I've had titles that I love so much that I keep trying to poke at the book to figure out what it is, because I want to use the title. A lot of my titles really bug publishers and publicists and things like that, because they only make sense after you've read the book, which I kind of like. I like that feeling of like, it's a little mysterious, and then you read the book and it sort of clicks together and you get that moment of pattern recognition from it. Some of it was, I've co-written a number of books, so those titles are very different to sort of set them apart from the weirdness that is me. I don't know what the total answer is beyond that. It never dawned on me that they should be the same either.
Yeah. Well, I think he's probably thinking of the likes of Ryan Holiday, for example, where they use the same format. Courage is Calling.
I'm sorry. The answer is I'm actually trained as a writer and not a marketer.
Yeah, that is. I
mean, like, in all honesty, like a lot of people who come up as in marketing will do things like that, but like I'm in it for the words.
Yeah, it's a big difference. Super, guys. Well, listen, thanks so much, Bryan, for joining us, especially as you're on the road there. And Stephen, as always, thank you a ton. This was hilarious and an absolute blast. And then again, I just want to encourage everyone, this is the last opportunity to do the 10 bulk buy and get all the bonuses that we mentioned, the GNAR Country training, which is going to be retailing at over 2K, and also Flow for Writers, and all the other bonuses, including the live call with Stephen.
It's a great book, too. It's worth a read, man. It's a very good book, actually.
Yeah, what did you like about it, Bryan? I'm curious.
I loved how personal it was, and I loved how he brought in that sort of the motivation, the ultimate motivation, being bullied in school. It was very personal and very gut, right? But it was really important, and I think anybody who's interested in getting after it and doing something they're proud of will find a lot of gold in that book. So bravo.
Super. Yeah. Well, on that note, thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Friend. And Bryan, any way people can support the work you're doing as well?
BryanCallen.com. I'll be at Sony Hall in New York, March 11th. Come get some. Doing some stand-up March 11th, Sony Hall. And there's still tickets left. And get those tickets at BryanCallen.com. And then I'll be in West Nyack, New York at Levity Live, March 16, 17, 18, if you want to come watch some stand-up, but only if you like laughing super hard.
Hey, how many days a year are you on the road doing comedy?
As many as I want to be, but probably lately I'll probably be doing at least 2 weekends a month, but probably 3, because I'm greedy and I love it. So,
is it that you're so insecure that if you don't get on stage that often, get that adoration, you start to feel bad about yourself? Or is it that you're just such a bad comic that you need that much practice?
All of it. Yes. Yes. The answer is yes.
Stephen's fighting back there, Brian, from earlier.
No, I just give. I like to give. I'm a comedy Jesus. I give. I'm a giver. I'm like an athletic Santa Claus. All right, kids, I'm out.
All righty.
Thank you, everybody. That was fun.
Last. Super. Thanks so much, guys.
If what you've heard on Flow Research Collective Radio has been helpful, please consider doing us a solid and leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you are listening to this. Reviews help us connect to a wider audience so we can get these peak performance principles out to more people.